Japan's relation with China will be examined in this section. China is, of course, an inescapable neighbor, and Japan has to live with it. The relations suffer from a difficult and violent history pre-1945. However, during most of the post-war era, Japan has adopted a posture of constructive engagement vis-à-vis China, separating economics from political affairs. More recently, facing China's rise, Japan has adopted a more realistic strategy to more firmly defend its interests. So Japan and China has had a difficult history. It is interesting to note that back in 1549, Japan decided to end its recognition of China's regional hegemony and get out of the Chinese tributary system. Later on, two wars opposed the neighbor. In particular, Japan's violent invasion of China and the atrocities committed are still vivid memories in China and explains that the nationalism factor and historical issues still play an important role in the relations. In the early post-war, Japan followed the US line and did not recognize immediately the communist government in Beijing. Nevertheless, the Prime Minister Yoshida considered that China was a natural market for Japan and encouraged trade relations. Thus, in 1965, Japan became the first economic partner of China. Later on, in 1972, the President Nixon visited China and declared his willingness to normalize the relation. This was a shock for Tokyo, which has not been consulted. Thereafter, Tokyo quickly normalized its own diplomatic relation with Beijing. Subsequently, Japan started to provide important amount of economic aid supposed to serve as a kind of war reparation. This economic assistance will play an important role to support Chinese development and growth. From 1997 to 2007, China was the first recipient of Japanese aid. The political relations between the two countries were good enough to allow for the visit of the new Heisei Emperor Akihito to China in 1992. In the post-Cold War, the economic and trade relationship developed rapidly, and in 2007, China became Japan's first trading partner. However, the political and strategic relations became tense. That's why it is said that the Sino-Japanese relations at that time were politically cold and economically hot. Japan indeed tried to separate the economic and political tracks, also because the two economies are grown increasingly interdependent. So political tensions were created by historical issues and nationalism. In 2001, Prime Minister Koizumi visited the Yasukuni Shrine. This shrine is controversial because it honors war dead, including some war criminals. This visit caused Chinese anger and the suspension of the political dialogue between the two countries during 5 years. Also, at that time, China was increasingly seen as a security risk for Japan. In 1995, China conducted nuclear tests. Tensions rose in the Taiwan Strait. And in addition, Japan began to worry about the exponential rise of Chinese defense budget. So Japan adapted its approach and developed a kind of mixed strategy to China with 3 elements. First, a deterrence strategy in the East China Sea. Second, a counterbalancing approach to China. And third, a policy of conditional engagement. Since 2012, China has made frequent sea and air incursions around the Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. The Senkaku Islands are located in the southwest part of Japan. They are under Japan's control since 1885, but they are claimed by Beijing and Taipei since the 1970s under the name Diaoyu. In 2012, the government of Japan nationalized some of the islands, which provoked a strong reaction from China. Since then, Chinese Coast Guard ships are regularly intruding into the waters around the islands, trying to change the status quo. This creates a very tense situation in the East China Sea. In response, Japan strengthened its posture in the area and modernized its defense equipment, as well as deepening its alliance with the US. But China is also a systemic rival. Japan considers that China wants to revise the liberal world order, and it considers that Beijing is using its Belt and Road Initiative to expand its influence, norms, and institutions worldwide. Japan opposes a counterbalancing strategy by building up a network of like-minded partners and by proposing an alternative vision for Asia based on the defense of liberal values. This project is the free and open Indo-Pacific. Nevertheless, China remains a key economic partner, and Japan is trying to walk a fine line not to damage its trade relationship. That's why Abe and Xi met in 2018 and boosted their economic cooperation, including in third countries. In the meantime, the COVID-19 crisis pushed Japan to diversify its investment away from China and reduce its dependence in key strategic sectors.